If you've been following along my journey over the past couple of years, you'll know that I've been on the search for a stable black stoneware clay body. From the research I've done, most black commercial stonewares aren't really produced with the intention of them being fired to cone 10. Thus, in my previous tests with a different body, I encountered all kinds of issues. From degassing that led to bloating, really rough, scratchy textures, some dunting, which is a form of cracking, and the pots themselves slumping and collapsing as they were being fired too hot. Many of these issues were my fault. I could have made the pots to be thicker, fire them cooler, and biscuit fire them over a longer, slower period of time so the stoneware can degas and doesn't cause issues at the glaze firing. There were a few successes though, mainly with pots that were placed lower down in the kiln and didn't have enclosed shapes like the lidded jars did. I also left these pots thicker in places so their forms wouldn't soften and slump quite so much. Anyway, I suppose what I'm actually on the lookout for is a body that is in itself more stable, and this bag of black clay was very kindly sent to me by Valentine Clays. Not only that, but dozens of you got in touch to recommend it. Now, it doesn't have the highest temperature range, so I will have to mix it down a touch with some other stonewares to give it some strength. But I'll also try it raw, firing it on the lowest shelf in the kiln right next to the door, where it's the coolest. The good thing about this body is that from what I can tell, it doesn't contain any manganese. This means that it's safer to work with and won't give off any horrible fumes when firing it. It's coloured using black stains, which means it's suitable for domestic wear, and it contains 25% 0.2mm grog. This is so tiny that you can barely feel it, and whilst the clay body does feel very smooth, 25% grog is a huge amount, so it should add rather a lot of stability to the clay body, which is something I really need. Lots of people have been telling me that it fires to a sort of grey colour when fired in oxidation, so it's going to be interesting in the long term to see how this stuff fires in reduction. And for my initial tests, I'll be throwing 3 pieces, 3 bowls. One made up from 100% of this body, another blended down by a third, and another by a half. I don't want to blend it down too much, as ultimately I want to keep as much of the black colour as possible. And the body I'm adding to it is this high iron stoneware clay body that contains larger particles of grog, but it still fires quite dark, as compared to say a white stoneware, which means the black tone shouldn't be lost too much, even if it's mixed down by half. And by the way, I'm going to apologise at this point, just so you don't get your hopes up too much. This is another start in a series of videos, so unfortunately, you won't see the finished fired results today, but I will go over the entire throwing and trimming process using these new materials. At the end of the day, YouTube is sort of secondary to my practice. I try to think of it as more of a weekly blog on the whole, with occasional videos that show the processes from beginning to end. As if any of you who make pottery will know, this is a craft where you can't really rush things, and I feel like I have to keep this balance carefully checked, as I'd rather not be a YouTube potter, letting the videos and algorithms dictate what I make, but a potter's potter who just makes videos on the side. I hope that's understandable. Anyway, in the background I've been mixing up these 3 balls of clay, blending the bodies as best I can into one smooth, even mixture, which I have to say is always a bit of a pain on a small scale like this, as I don't feel I can wrap my hands around the lump of clay to spiral wedge it properly, which means it's always quite an awkward process, and thus, just to make sure they are fully blended, I spent more time coning these lumps up and down at the start to mix them further. I'm starting out with the lump of clay that's 100% the new Schwarz stoneware, and I have to say this stuff is lovely to throw with, but it does feel weird. It holds its shape fantastically, but due to how much grog is in it, it really feels as if it clings to itself. Beyond that, at the trimming stage, the body feels incredibly dense. And this is a strange thing if you've never encountered it. For instance, with my usual clay body, which feels as if it's quite open due to the large particle size, it's relatively easy to dig a turning tool into it and for it to begin removing material. But with this stuff, I really feel as if I have to press harder, which probably means if I work with this again, I should trim it when it's slightly softer. For now though, I'm throwing a simple angular bowl shape, although these do start off as curved shapes initially, with a small indent at the top, which I set quite early on in the process. As the wider the opening becomes, the more difficult this groove is to create, as the walls are thinner and you have to sustain the pinch for longer. So whenever I make these shapes, I roughly set it initially, and then I refine it further later on, which is what you can see me doing here. When I throw these shapes, I'm sort of concentrating on 2 things, the interior shape and the indent around the rim. I don't mind so much about the curved form underneath it, provided it's left slightly on the thick side so there's material in it I can turn into the angular shape later on. The same goes for the foot. As long as it's tall enough and left slightly on the thick side, it doesn't matter how neat it is at this stage, as once leather hard, they'll be trimmed back further and the final shape uncovered. In fact, it helps leaving some excess down here as it makes prying it off the wheel easier. But first, I'm going to set my throwing gauge's pointer so that I can throw each of these tests to have the same shape. You can see how sticky this clay is by how it follows the wire as I drag it underneath. It feels somewhat plasticky, more akin to porcelain, perhaps. I leave the skim of clay that's left over on the wheelhead, as it sort of acts like Velcro, helping the next lump of clay stick down, provided of course it isn't covered in water. Before a pot is wired through, I lift up the pointer. This way I can loop the wire behind the pot and then pull it towards me. I then press my fingers into the excess clay around the bottom and lift and spin the wheel in the same motion. This breaks the slightly tacky seal between the two parts, but you will find if you're trying to lift off clays that are incredibly smooth and contain practically no grog, that the entire task is just so much more difficult, as the sticky clay clings to your hands, and when you try to set the pot down, it follows your fingers where you release it, distorting the piece. Thus, if you are working with something like porcelain, I really do recommend throwing on bats, and you'll also have to adapt many of your throwing techniques as compared to what's generally shown in my videos. This is now the third lump of clay, mixed from 50% black stoneware and 50% of the high iron body. You can see that I've left the rim intentionally thick. This way it can be pinched and altered and stretched out without it becoming too thin, which is another common problem that beginners often run into. They'll throw the rims to be razor sharp, which means that if you try to stretch them any further or alter their shape, they'll most likely tear, as there simply isn't enough material to work with. And this is sort of one of the things you're learning at the start, how to allocate the clay properly to the right parts of the vessel so you can actually throw the pot, the pieces you have envisioned in your mind, rather than say struggling the entire way and just hoping you end up with the right shape. It's now the following day, and again, surprisingly, all these pieces dried out very quickly, which is something I found happens with clays that are perhaps on the slightly more dense side. Anyway, they're flipped over so the thicker bases have some more time to dry out, as naturally the clay is thicker here as compared to say the rim of the piece. Thus, if I left it upright like it was before, the rims would very quickly turn bone dry, whilst the bases remain quite damp and soft. So by flipping them, there's more airflow around the foot and they'll dry out more quickly. Equally, the rim will dry out more slowly, as there's less air flowing around it when flipped upside down, and the inside shape is enclosed, creating a sort of damp environment, helping to keep the rim at the perfect state of leather hard. Before I begin trimming some of these, I'm just going to round the rims, as this piece had turned slightly oval overnight as it slowly dried. With that done, I centre the piece the right way up and double check the rim. In this instance, it was wavering a touch too much for me, and so, in order to fix this, I turn the piece upside down, lightly tap center it, and then I turn the bottom flat. This means that the undulation in the lip is transferred to the base, and they sort of cancel each other out. It also creates a flatter surface that will seal to the wheelhead better when covered in slip and tap centered. You'll notice that I'm inserting my left hand as I do this, and with it I'm pressing the pot down, pinning it in place so that when I'm tap centering I don't accidentally knock it too far across the wheel in the opposite direction. It's a weight, if you will. As the piece is relatively light, it's easy to move around, so when getting it centered, it helps to apply some downward pressure to the piece. Despite trying to carefully dry this piece, you can see that the rim is just whitening a touch, so before trimming it any further, I dampen it and burnish it. This way I can create the glassy smooth finish on the rim that I need. If I didn't do this to the lip, and I left it rough and sandy, once coated with glaze and fired, there's a high chance that the rim would remain gritty too, which isn't the best thing to find in the finished object. In fact, if I do find a pot like this, say at the biscuit fired stage, I'll wet sand it to a glassier finish, just so the glazes I use settle more smoothly over them. With the top portion of the wall trimmed into a straight line, I can begin turning the lower facet on these shapes. And it's this moment that I find it so helpful to be able to reach my hand inside to feel the cross-section, as all it takes here is one tiny wrong movement for the blade to catch and tear through the wall above it. I can also be far more accurate with my trimming because of this, and it means that when I flip the pot upside down in order to turn the base, I have a much better understanding of the shape of the pot, and I know where I need to trim clay away from and where I need to leave it, so I don't accidentally turn the walls too thinly, creating weak points. The pot is then sliced away, the wheelhead is tidied up, the small bowl is tap centered, and then secured in place with 3 lumps of soft clay that are pressed around the lip. I also pinned the pot down from above using a spinner, as even with the rim secured in place, I haven't pressed the lumps of clay really firmly against the pot, as that could very easily distort the opening. and with a spinner like this that stabilises my left hand, I can apply much more pressure through the foot, pinning the pot onto the wheel head. And now that I have a better view of the foot, I can trim it so it's straight. I then straighten the wall underneath and create a very neat corner where the two parts meet. In fact, anywhere there's an angular change, I try to keep the lines very neat and crisp, as this way they'll show more clearly through the glaze that's eventually coated over them. It's when hollowing out this internal foot that I can really feel the difference between different types of clay. Those that contain grog made up of larger particle sizes are much easier to sink the blade of the trimming tool into, whereas clays that are very smooth or contain very tiny particles of grog are harder to get the tools to bite on, meaning that the process of hollowing out these thick feet is a bit more of an arduous procedure. The last thing I do is place the bowl on a very smooth high-pressure laminate bat, and then I run a dense damp sponge over the surface just to ensure they're lovely and smooth, as again this helps the glazes I use settle more neatly on the object. By the way, I don't mind if I'm using a slip of a different colour, as for the time being all it's doing is helping hold the pot against the wheel head. If I didn't trim the bottom, then yes, it would discolour it, but as I'm going to be flipping this pot over and trimming the base, then the type of slip used to stick the pot down doesn't really matter. You may have also noticed that I'm letting this black stoneware contaminate the pink-red high iron clay body that's also filling up the wheel tray. Eventually I'll blend all of this together, and then I'll mix this with a larger batch of clay I know fires to a hotter temperature. I do this occasionally, and then I make pots such as bowls with these blends, which leads to interesting batches of pieces that end up being quite subtly different from the rest I produce. This is the lump of clay that's entirely black, and whilst I'm sure hollowing out the foot is going to be a bit of a pain, trimming the sides of this piece was an absolute pleasure, as I can hold the tool's blades at the right angle for them to carve away the material properly. Whereas the same can't be said for when I'm trimming the inside of the foot, as the tool and the blade has to come in from a much steeper angle, which complicates things. The other thing that was immediately apparent was just how little this piece chattered, which is a topic, by the way, that my video last weekend was all about. Specifically, what chattering is and how to avoid it, a link to which I'll leave on screen now and in the description below. Essentially, as the particles of grog in the body are so tiny, the blade just rips straight through them instead of colliding with them slightly and bouncing. I've mentioned it before, but I don't think this approach to trimming is particularly beginner-friendly. It's walking the line, so to speak, as the pot is only held in place with a narrow expanse of clay. Any small movement will send the piece hurtling into the wheel tray, and so if you are just starting out, I recommend trimming this way up, as the likelihood is the pot you're making will have quite a few undulations and wobbles in it, so you want the pot to rest on its widest portion so it remains the most stable as it spins. This way you can more easily trim through the irregularities in the pot without it being torn off centre. But if you attempt to trim the way I do with the pot upright initially, and the piece itself is fairly irregular, there's a much greater chance that the pot will be torn off centre when your tool collides with one of those irregularities, due to the small point of contact connecting the pot onto the wheel head. This is something I think I need to preface more and more, as I understand that many beginners watch my videos, and they may perhaps think that this way of trimming pots is the best way of doing it. And whilst it works for my practice, it isn't truthfully the most suitable technique for many other different styles of pottery. These specific bowl shapes I create need this intensive trimming, but other shapes with thinner walls and less clay on the bottom don't. This is something I actually struggle with sometimes, as of course I understand that the content I produce can influence how people create pottery, and beginners watching may think that this is just the standard way of how pots are produced, when in fact some of my trimming techniques are slightly unusual. So I ponder whether I should actually show them, or perhaps what makes my account interesting, or at least I hope it's interesting, is the very particular way I make pots. Yes, the technique shown might not be appropriate for everybody, but at the end of the day what makes this craft so fascinating is the sheer number of approaches there are in creating ceramics. I think you would be hard pressed to find two potters who make pots, glaze them and fire them in precisely the same way. And it's this variance, I think, that brings so much life and character to this craft, and I think it's one of the reasons it's jumped so much in popularity over the past decade. As the material is so soft and malleable and easily worked, it conveys the maker's ideals so clearly, in a way that some other crafts can't quite capture. By the way, this is how I scoop out trimmings from the inside more easily. I use a piece of very soft clay that I roll into a log, and then I glide it over the walls, collecting all the small burrs of clay. This beats blowing harshly inside, scattering tiny fragments of clay all over the workspace, the floor, in your hair, beard, and even on the inside of your glasses. This final bowl is made from 50% of the black stoneware and 50% of the high iron body called ES80. You can hear the larger particles of grit when I trim this, and the surface left behind the turning tool was far more rough, meaning that I had to spend more time burnishing it smooth. Throughout a vast majority of this process, as I trim with my right hand, my left hand is clasping the pot, be it via the rim or holding the foot here. Essentially, I'm ready to catch the pot at a moment's notice if I feel it coming loose. This, again, is something else you gain with experience, because as the pot is spinning around so quickly, usually you'll feel it shift off centre first, or it'll begin to vibrate within the lugs of clay that are holding it around the rim as one of those moves all comes loose. Ultimately, and perhaps most irritatingly, the thing that helps with trimming pots evenly the most is throwing even pots initially. Say your pot is wavering all over the place with an undulation in the lip and wobbly walls. How on earth are you meant to centre that and trim it evenly if the pot itself isn't even? I've seen this in action. I've given students of mine pots that I've thrown and I let them trim them. And as the pot has been thrown with a consistent cross-section and without any movement in the walls or rim, the entire process of trimming suddenly becomes so much more straightforward, thus making it apparent to the person who's learning the importance of being able to throw pots that aren't wobbly and have neat, even walls and a level rim. So, here are the 3 leather hard pots, and annoyingly and as always, I really love the colours they have in this moment. The neutral tones with the matte surface are stunning, and it really does make me consider whether I should just stop with all the glazes, switch to electric firing, and make pots like these with simple colourants mixed into the clays so the colours you saw on those pots are preserved. Anyhow, you'll have to check back in a couple of weeks or a month or 2 to see these pieces glazed and finished. I'm sorry for the wait, but that's the reality of things. Oh, and lastly, happy holidays to every single one of you who regularly watches my videos and makes it all the way to the end. Your support, be it subscriptions, likes or comments, do a huge amount to help my channel, and I can't tell you how lucky I am to have so many of you on board. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.